Thank you very much. I want to thank the Sierra Club and all of you for coming out on a Saturday. And yes, Heritage Foundation is extremely interested in this issue. And there are some issues where we can agree on. Heritage Foundation is a C3 organization. We're a think tank. And yes, we're free market oriented, and that's our focus. And we can cover a lot of different public policy issues, try to educate policymakers, and we disseminate information out to the public on policy issues. I work in the economic policy area, doing agriculture policy and environmental policy. What I want to talk about today is the federal sugar program. It is certainly very similar to other agricultural programs, and that is, it's all about subsidies, and it's about centralized planning. If we own a business, it is up to us to get consumers and respond to the market, and innovate, and develop new ideas, and try to make money off of actually trying to meet consumer demand. Well, that doesn't exist when you're talking about sugar cane and sugar beets and the federal sugar program. So two areas I want to focus on are, one, I want to talk about the sugar program and its impact, particularly the economic impact. And then secondly, I do want to talk about the potential political reasons why the sugar program is still in place and the influence of sugar producers generally. Okay, so how does the sugar program work? There's a price guarantee right from the start, right at the outset for the program. That's pretty nice. So if you're a sugar cane and sugar beet processor, not the sugar producer, I want to clarify, you can receive loans from the USDA. Now the processors can pay back the loans, or they can forfeit the sugar instead of paying the government back. This gives them the ability to avoid paying off the loans if market prices fail to cover their costs. By the way, can you hear me okay? All right, so I'm looking down a little. Now the big issue also is the sugar program tries to control supply. And it does that through, one, marketing allotments, where the government actually restricts how much sugar can be sold in this country. The second way is it limits the amount of imports that can come into this country. And this applies to both sugar beets and to sugar cane. Now, so let's think about the impact of prices. If we're restricting supply, and that's what usually happens, it's going to drive up sugar prices, and that's what happens. Now I'm going to cite a 2006 Department of Commerce report. Basically, the report says, in general, the domestic price of U.S. wholesale refined sugar over the last 25 years has been 2 to 3 times the world price. Now, before I came here, we looked at the refined sugar prices for the U.S. compared to world prices. There was a time there for about a year or two where it was getting kind of close. Well, guess what? It's more than doubling it. Okay? Now let's look at the sugar program and its impact on jobs. A lot of arguments will be made by the sugar producers that we need these subsidies because it creates all kinds of jobs. Well, again, going back to the Department of Commerce report, for each sugar growing and harvesting job that the sugar program and the high sugar prices save, nearly 3 confectionery manufacturing jobs are lost. So you have to kind of, yes, you can't just look at jobs created. You have to remember that if I invest here, or the cost here, there's going to be potentially impact somewhere where you're not looking. And that happens to be with the food manufacturers. And according to Agrilytica, which is an economic consulting firm, between 1997 and 2011, there were 127,000 jobs lost in the sugar-using industry. In sugar-using industry, what I mean is the manufacturers that in fact use sugar for their products. You've also probably have heard of candy makers leaving this country due to the high sugar prices. That's happening. And in fact, the Department of Commerce report basically confirms that there's significant evidence to support that the high sugar prices are one of the reasons why these companies are leaving. Probably have heard that the sugar program is called a no-cost program. You heard that? Yeah, I love that one. It's the idea is that, yes, it's not a cost to taxpayers, which, by the way, is wrong because sometimes it actually is a cost to taxpayers. But generally, most of the time, taxpayers may not pay, but taxpayers are also known by the name consumers. And as consumers, you do pay big time for these higher sugar prices. A recent study, a May 2003 Iowa State report, found that getting rid of the sugar program would save consumers up to $3.5 billion a year. That's not a no-cost program. It certainly costs a lot of money. Now I was debating whether or not to discuss this, but there's something called the 0 for 0 plan, which maybe some of you have heard about. It's something that's been floated around in the last couple of years, I think in many ways to divert attention to the need for real sugar reform. And it's actually been introduced by Representative Yoho from Florida. It's co-sponsored by 11 legislators. 5 of the legislators are from Florida, and it's bipartisan, those co-sponsors. And the idea is we'll get rid of our subsidies once other countries get rid of their sugar subsidies. Don't be fooled by this. First of all, it's a flawed premise. I've already told you about all these problems with these subsidies in this entire sugar program. Why should we have a program that hurts us domestically just because other countries, if they want to have self-destructive economic policies, good for them. But why should we have that? So it makes no sense. We shouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot while other countries are doing it. And of course, subsidies are simply bad policy. They distort market decisions. They distort the decisions that people make. And of course, hurt jobs, increase cost to consumers, and just some details on the way this would work, this 0 for 0 plan. On its face, and as I analyzed it, the only way the sugar program would be reformed is if you have tons of these countries decide to pass a law to get rid of their sugar programs. There would not even have to be a legitimate promise by the United States that we're going to get rid of ours, just they have to do it. Then the president would come back and be asked to recommend to Congress, hey, maybe you should propose some legislation to get rid of the program. And that's it. And then just maybe, there's not even a promise that we'd even consider reform. So it's not realistic, and don't get fooled again by this idea that we'll get rid of our subsidies once others get rid of their subsidies. Now I want to talk about the politics of it. Look, I work in agricultural policy, and the sugar program is certainly a poster child of a lot of things that's wrong with agricultural policy. But it's not the only thing that's wrong with agricultural policy. And I think that the problems with the sugar program hopefully will illuminate some of those problems. If Congress, look, we've heard about the impact of money, how important money is in politics, but in many ways money is the symptom, and the disease is really the fact that Congress creates these programs, creates these incentives, these goodies for these special interests. And if you're someone that's receiving these goodies, you're going to do whatever you can to make sure nobody touches that particular program. That's why they spend the money. In addition, even if you don't have a program right now, you know that Congress will create one for you, especially in the agriculture area. So guess what? You're going to go to Congress and do what you can. That's the problem. And we need to start challenging this idea that agriculture and the sugar program and dairy program or whatever it might be needs these subsidies. Let me tell you, agricultural sector is doing really well. It's a very sophisticated industry. The sugar industry especially is really well. They can manage risk just as well as anybody else. They don't need the subsidies. We're not in the 1920s or 30s things have changed since then, a little bit. Well, not when it comes to agriculture, unfortunately. And agricultural policy is one of those rare issues that it's not a partisan issue. It's not. Democrats and Republicans are equally bad. And that's why every 5 years or so the Farm Bill passes. And, you know, from a free market perspective, we hear legislators espouse free market beliefs all the time. But man, when it comes to the free market, when it comes to the Farm Bill, that's their little holiday away from the free market principles. Look, in Florida, you got sugar. Iowa, you got corn. Vermont, dairy. We keep going. And what happens is, and you probably have heard about this concept, is there's concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. And what happens is you have an interest group, a very small interest group, that benefits tremendously from a particular program. And then that costs are spread across all taxpayers. So the special interest group, again, really cares, is going to lobby on it, make sure it stays in place. But taxpayers don't care as much because it's not very obvious what the costs are. So if Congress decided to give me $10,000, I want to make sure that Congress keeps giving me $10,000. But if that cost is spread, and it costs maybe it's not that many people here, but let's say it's a penny to all of you, you're not going to care as much. And that's what happens to the sugar program. My $10,000 stays, I keep it, and then somebody else, you get something on corn and whatever, it keeps going. And that's how it operates. So a lot of people don't know what's happening with the sugar program. And they don't have enough interest to do anything about it. And of course, as you might imagine, look, there's a lot of reasons why sugar has influence in Florida. But why does sugar, in Louisiana, in North Dakota, but why does sugar have so much influence in some states? You'd be like, why in the world New York? And look, there's a lot of horse trading that goes along. You know, you support my program, I'll support your program. That's how it works. And certainly, look, yes, they have some targeted donations as well. Something that may be controversial to some of you, I hope not, but one of the things that we pushed heavily during this last Farm Bill debate was the Farm Bill is really a food stamp bill. It's not a criticism of food stamps. It's just the truth that 80% of the costs associated with the Farm Bill is food stamps. The reason why is combined together, and the proponents of keeping it together, of the ag programs and the food stamps together, will admit the reason why they do it is because they think it's the only way that these programs will get passed. Well, guess what? You're never going to reform food stamps. Either direction, if you want. You know, I don't care what your perspective is on it. These incentives also encourage farmers to potentially use environmentally sensitive land as well, and marginal lands, because once again, that's where the incentives lie. But I think the sugar program, the sugar lobby is extremely powerful, obviously. But it's time to start consulting. We need to stop consulting farmers and ranchers by thinking they need to get handouts. They can manage risk, just like I said. And the sugar program and all these other ag interests, we've got the government should not be providing subsidies that encourage them to grow crops that maybe the public doesn't even want them to grow, and also to do things that may actually threaten the environment. And I think the subsidies do have that type of impact, and we need to recognize that as well.